Before I introduce our next guest, we have more greetings that are arrived today. Mr. Art Reid, Mayor of Carbonear, Newfoundland. Dear Art, congratulations on the 40th anniversary of joining Confederation. April 1st, 19... I would now like to call upon the MP from Bonavista Trinity Conception, Rear Admiral Fred Mifflin.
Mr. Smallwood, Mr. Wells, Mr. Peach, Mr. Newhook, Your Worship, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. When I was a little boy, 8 years old, going around in Bonavista, opening doors for my grandfather to have people vote for the referendum on Confederation, little did I realize that 40 years later, I would be standing here by the side of the man who made it possible. 40 years is a long time. I would like to tell you how very honored I am here to be here this evening as your Member of Parliament, standing next to the father of Confederation with Canada for Newfoundland, in the historic town of Carbonear, which I believe may have made the difference in the second referendum in the midst of an election. I think it's great. With a lot of the main players there, and I'm very pleased about that. I just, in conversation with Mr. Smallwood earlier this evening, I told him that I had just finished rereading his book, I Chose Canada. And that book begins with a very simple expression. I was born in 1900. It's probably the only uncontroversial statement in that book. I'd like to tell you how it ends. It ends by saying, in his chapter, and to conclude and finish, never say die, never give up, turn a deaf ear to the timid and the faithless, and then at last, if the very fates do defeat us, go down not with a whimper, but defiantly to the end. With that spirit, there is no going down. I'd like to have it said of me that I ruled over an empire in which the concrete never set. What wonderful words. There was an awful lot that happened between the first few words and the last few words. And for those of you who sometimes get things out of perspective about where we're heading and feel that we have problems today, I would commend that book to your reading. It's an excellent piece of work. I found it very, very inspirational. The book talks about a number of things. It talks about ideas. And I'm going to use, if Mr. Smallwood would permit me, some of the quotations out of that book. I couldn't do any better. I could try to camouflage it, but you could see through it. I know this gentleman could, so I wouldn't get away with it anyway. On the business of ideas, Mr. Smallwood, using a quotation from a great man, said that there is nothing stronger in this world than an idea whose time had come. But there's more to it than that. He quoted another great man, which said, ideas won't keep. Something must be done about them. And I would submit to you that somebody must do something about them. He had the idea. The idea wasn't new. Confederation, we thought about it in the Quebec Conference in 1864, many times in between, and I guess most notably around the early 1930s when we were in the business of commission of government. But it was their idea, not ours. Mr. Smallwood again said tonight, more or less, the idea really came to fruition in the mid-20s when he and others were walking along Quidi-Vidi Lake. It's a long time from that time until the idea really took place. And with the idea came a theory, and some great man said about theory, first a new theory is attacked as absurd, then it is admitted to be true, but obvious and insignificant. Finally, it is seen to be so important that its adversaries claim that they themselves discovered it. A theory that was put into practice with enthusiasm. And another great man said that nothing great in this world was ever accomplished without enthusiasm. And another famous man, Thomas Carlyle, said, I prefer the error of enthusiasm to the indifference of wisdom. And the enthusiasm led to growth. Growth that in a quarter of a century achieved more than Newfoundland had achieved in 452 years. All growth is a leap in the dark, a spontaneous, unpremeditated act without benefit of experience. And the growth led to success. And as a sailor, I don't need to quote any great men to tell you that if you're measuring success, it is not the going out of port, but the coming in that determines the success of the voyage. I'd like to read you something else that Mr. Smallwood said in his book. If I had advice to give to my successors in power and to my fellow Newfoundlanders, it would conserve the ever-present danger that threatens to destroy Newfoundland. We are far removed from the corridors of power, so far from the mass population and the power of Canada, so far from the main Canadian market, so much out of the minds of Canada's principal captains of industry and finance, that we could easily be wasted down the drain. It will require our most stubborn determination to defeat the force of megalopolis. Ladies and gentlemen, I found it very striking that when Mr. Smallwood described the emotions that politicians feel, wounds, gladness, elation, and emotion, he described his feeling when he signed the terms of confederation, certainly not under wounds, not under gladness, not even under elation. He put it under the category of emotion. The emotion of growing up with his grandchildren, the emotion of watching men land on the moon, the emotion of hearing the Ode to Newfoundland played on the organ of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my belief that the dreams, the ideas, the enthusiasm, and the growth is still with us. Mr. Peach talked about dreams, and I'd like to close with a quotation that I find great inspiration in. To be all that we can be, we must dream of being more. I give you congratulations and best wishes from all my colleagues in the House of Commons, and especially our leader, Mr. John Turner. Thank you very much.